So just quick introduction. My name's Jim Christy. I'm the CEO at Postali. We're a legal marketing company. We've been around for a little over a decade now, work exclusively with lawyers and growing their online presence. We were originally actually started out as a direct mail business and have since kind of moved away from that. That business does still exist as a different entity. It does still work in some markets, but we are just solely digital. So today, I'll start sharing my screen here. We're going to talk about marketing your law firm. And this will be the, as it says, the 101 version. Basically, every slide in this deck could be a standalone presentation, and there's a lot of depth beneath each. So if people have questions, by all means, like feel free to chime in. I don't have the chat monitored right now, but so Nick, if you've got it up, feel free to flag me. Awesome. All right, so let's dive in. We're going to start with something that is the most overlooked piece of getting marketing set up for your firm, which is actually think about what you want to achieve before you start calling around or before you start doing. So planning is really essential. We talk with a lot of folks that they don't really have goals set. There are things that they think they want to execute upon, and oftentimes they'll enter into agreements that really don't fulfill what they're trying to achieve. So if you take nothing else from this meeting, if you're looking towards doing marketing for your firm, sit down, write out your goals. And these goals don't have to be super high, like high depth. They can just be like buckets, and we'll talk about that on the next slide. After that, we're going to talk about setting up your brand or kind of polishing your brand if you've already done it. Then creating a strategy. Those things are kind of concurrent. So that's why in the slide, we kind of see them happening at the same time. And then you can do the work is once you understand what you're trying to do and you have the foundational elements in place to do that. So, all right. So setting your goals, what do you want to achieve? This is set up in kind of a tiered structure. So at a minimum, I think most people would say, if they get referred business, they want to make sure that that person actually calls them and doesn't go, you referred them to me, but I couldn't find their website, or I found their website and it looked like it was from like 1983. Like, I don't trust that, so I'm not going to call that person. So that should be table stakes of, even if you don't believe in actively marketing your firm from a growth perspective, you should at least be making sure you're not losing out on referrals. And this has more to do with brand and positioning and less to do with marketing tactics. And we'll kind of like dissect those things as part of this presentation. Another thing you may want to do is you may want a better perceived reputation. I say perceived because I think oftentimes your reputation in the legal community is one thing, by peers and colleagues and things like that, and that is your legal reputation. But what people actually see online from a marketing perspective or a prospective client point of view is more important for what we're talking about here. So those things are related, but they're not as closely related as maybe they should be. But that's just how the digital age works. And the last thing is growth. Do you want to actually grow? And if you want to grow, have some understanding of like, how many new clients per month do you actually want to get? And try to put some type of numeric measurement on it, because it is helpful to say, like, I want to get more clients, but there's a big difference between saying, I want to get 2 new clients a month and I want to maintain a solo practice versus I want to get 30 new clients a month and I want to hire 3 people in the next year. Those are different objectives that your marketing agency is going to think about differently. So, all right, so moving in, part of the establishing who you are, like once you set out those goals, brand is really important. And this is something that I think a lot of firms overlook, because historically it's been talked about in a way of like, I need a logo. So you go and you pay somebody $100 for a logo and it has scales of justice and all that stuff. Like, that's not really what we're talking about here. What we're talking about is like, your brand is kind of the embodiment of a lot of different elements of your practice. And it is what establishes who you are, and it creates preference for you. So even though, like, if 2 people are looking at 2 different law firm websites or evaluating a decision-making process, the brand is what's going to likely push them into a decision, whether that's completely emotional or whether they're actually assessing what's on someone's site or assessing what's on someone's credentials. So all these things play into it. And you can just think about this, like when you make a purchase decision outside of the legal industry, you have preferences for certain things. They might be preferences related to someone's customer service or related to just the emotions that something evokes. And I think that this is something that should be done a lot more than it is currently. And I think it's glossed over because people want to just get into the nuts and bolts. Like, hey, just build me a website. Like this really needs to be thought about ahead of time to say, what's going to go on that site? How do we want to communicate who you are to the world? Shore this up before you start going down the path of like putting things out there. Okay, so let's say that you've established those things. How do you actually go about communicating that with your audience? And this is where a lot of different elements come into play. So content or marketing copy really can matter. Who you choose to work with to build your website can have a big impact on this. So this is a decision of, if you want to present yourself in a certain way, if you don't have the skills to do it yourself, for example, then finding an agency that aligns with your vision for what you want to be, that can point to work and say, oh, we've done something similar to this, we can really tailor things. So things you want to think about, like, do you want to be seen as modern? Do you want to be seen as traditional? Photography tells a big story. So all of these little elements from the aesthetic of a website can really matter in how you showcase yourself. And you need to be asking yourself these questions, like, how do you want to be seen? And I don't encourage people to make decisions by committee, but I do encourage firms to, as you're going through the process of like, what does your website look like? Talk to people that are going to give you candid feedback and not just say, oh yeah, that looks great. Like, talk to people who are going to try to shoot holes in it, because you need to get that type of feedback to understand how the general public who doesn't know you as a lawyer might be viewing you. These types of things can be done systematically through focus groups, but those tend to be very expensive. And most small firms just don't have the budget to do something like that. So I'm basically encouraging you to do kind of your own ad hoc focus groups to understand, like, how are you being perceived? Because oftentimes it's different than what you think you're showcasing to the world. And even talking with a marketing agency is a good starting point to just say, what do you think is happening with my website right now? Like, what do you think people are seeing when they land here? And most agencies will be really like candid of, you're doing a good job here, but you might be perceived strangely for these reasons. Like, do you actually do all these areas of law? That's a big thing. Like, from a branding perspective, are you actually even communicating the area of law that your firm practices in? Or are you presenting yourself as a general practitioner, but you actually do 90% in one area? That can be confusing. So even that's like an element of what we're talking about here. So another piece that goes into your identity that kind of bleeds into the strategy is, who are you actually serving? So thinking about this from a design perspective might be, like the examples here, the firm on the left is serving high-end white-collar criminals in New York City. There's a reason why this is a more kind of like luxurious look than the firm on the right is a general practice firm in a smaller market in Ohio that just wants to be seen as approachable and kind of more family or customer oriented. So who are you serving really should impact how you present yourself from a design perspective. And these are just two kind of visual examples of that. So kind of jumping in, and again, we're glossing over a lot of the brand stuff, but jumping into the next piece is, once you kind of know who you are, then think about who are you actually trying to reach with your marketing. And this will be broken down into three categories that we're talking about here. So one, where are they? Are you a family law attorney in Detroit and you only want to service people in Wayne County? That alone is going to influence what your marketing strategy is going to be, versus if you're an immigration lawyer that might have two offices, but you can actually serve people everywhere. So not only does that impact how you like your marketing tactics, but that may impact, how you want to position yourself. So geography actually matters a lot more than I think a lot of people think at first glance, because one, Google is highly geographic specific. So you have limitations on where you're going to be seen. And you just need to be aware of that when you're going into the strategy. Other things, demographics and psychographics. So the demographics element is more about high end, low end is kind of the simplest way to think about this. And age, age, gender, things like that, where you wouldn't necessarily want to market a high-end divorce firm in a market that has no affluence whatsoever. And we see this all the time. We see people kind of marketing outside of the income ranges that they're trying to compete within. And this goes beyond online marketing. This is like, where do you establish your physical location? Like, if you want to cater to higher end clientele, you should probably have an office in a neighborhood that those are the demographics. And then the psychographic side of values, attitudes, aspirations, this has more to do with when you're trying to communicate with these people. If you know enough about how they think and how they act, writing compelling marketing content or just legal content that focuses on who you know your audience to be versus trying to cast an overly broad net and just approach and hit everybody that might be in the market. You're not going to win over everybody. I think that's something that you just always have to accept, that your market is not everyone. Even though if you think, hey, I'm an estate planning lawyer, everyone should have a will, chances are you don't want everyone as your client. So think about that when you're thinking about how you're communicating with them through your marketing. And this is just kind of like a little graphic of, we're in Columbus, so we use that. And when we work with local firms here, we think about things like this. Delaware County is the highest net worth county in the state. So when people say, I am trying to scale more high end, we're going to say, okay, well, let's not spend any money in Madison. Maybe we'll spend some in Licking County, but most of it's going to go to Delaware. Those are things that, you or a marketing company should be thinking about when you're thinking about the strategic side of marketing efforts. Okay, so jumping into, this is kind of the more tactical side of things. So there are a lot of ways to, once you have your brand established and you've kind of set up your site and you have your foundational elements, that's what I would call those things, is without those two things, you're probably going to have a disjointed strategy. But if you have those two things in place, then you can think about, how do I want to actually go to market with these services? We're going to talk about 6 different channels, and they all have pros and cons to them. There's no one size fits all approach. So something that I'd really strongly encourage everybody is, if you approach a marketing agency and they're trying to sell you a pre-established bundle of services, that's probably not the best fit for you. You really need to be thinking about items as a la carte, because as we walk through all of these various things kind of in a summary level, there's pros and cons, and you could burn through a lot of money, you could get nothing out of it, and sometimes it's just a bad fit. So let's start with organic. So what we mean here is search engine optimization. How can you rank higher in Google to show up and then get contacts from clients? So one, do your clients even look on Google to find you? Is a search engine something that makes sense? This is not true for all clients. Transactional, corporate litigation firms, I would not say that that's not a good place to be. But divorce law, criminal law, personal injury, we know for sure that people are searching for those types of lawyers online. So those are organic SEO is a good place to be. Now, organic visibility rises as online reputation and authority rises, and that takes a long time to build unless somebody's doing something kind of sketchy or hacky. So while the long-term ROI of SEO likely will make sense if you're with the right partner, this is like a cash flow negative proposition for 6 months to a year for most firms. So if you don't have cash flow to invest, don't start here. It's going to be a losing proposition. So when we talk with clients about where to begin, if that's the case, new firms or firms that are shifting practice areas or just firms that don't have the cash flow to invest heavy, let's wait on organic, or let's do a very light version of just establishing some SEO best practices, and let's put more of our dollars into paid. The reason why paid makes more sense is that you can force your way to the top of Google by paying more. As you would guess, by forcing your way into something, you're paying a lot. So this is a highly competitive market, and it's bid driven for the most part, with a few exceptions that we'll talk about. But paid means that you're going to get visibility. Then it's kind of up to you, and this is why Nick and I are doing this together, converting those leads into clients. And I would say that if you're investing any money in paid advertising where you're having to pay for a phone call, pay for a click, everything is very, very, it's important that you answer every call, because from a marketing perspective, we'll say things like, you got 10 calls last week. What happened to those? And if the answer is, well, we let 6 go to voicemail and we were only able to contact 2 of them, then those 4 phone calls that didn't actually connect could have cost you $1,000 and you don't know what you lost. So there's a hard cost and an opportunity cost in that. So these are like, we stress this early on with our clients of just what is your long-term plan for intake, because it matters so much to the effectiveness of these campaigns. Really all of them, but paid is the one where you feel the pain like immediately if you don't have a good intake system. Okay, so the next piece I'll just talk about real briefly is the way a search engine page looks. I think sometimes this changes a lot and people can get outdated on what's actually happening. So I just want to spend a little bit of time on this search. For example, we typed in divorce attorney. The very first thing we see are Google local service ads. These are ads that have been around for a while in Google's ecosystem, but only been around for about a year for law firms. So the competition level is still fairly low in most markets. Like Nixon, greater New York, it's not true there because everyone is doing it in big metros. But if you're in a smaller market, this is a huge area of opportunity. It's the first thing people see on a search. There's only 2 on mobile, but this is a desktop view. And this is a pay per contact model, which is great because you're only paying when someone contacts you and you have the ability to dispute a call if it's outside of your area. So these are strongly encouraged for a lot of clients that we're working with now. As we move into the next piece, paid ads. So those are below the local service ads. They're sometimes above them for more unique searches. You don't always get a local service ad showing, but you more often get an ad showing. So there's still opportunity for those to be top. Those are pay per click, meaning you're going to pay every time somebody clicks on it. So the active management of those campaigns is much more rigorous than the management of a local service ad campaign. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. Next is maps. We see maps as being the most valuable organic position by far. So if you're investing in SEO, you really need to be investing first and foremost in trying to get listed in this 3-pack. About 70% of organic conversions for clients we work with come through this 3-pack because a lot of people will jump over the ads and this is the first non-ad that people see. And as we get further down the page, we get into kind of snippets. People also ask, you might see news features, you might see a lot of different things here, but it's to target that as an opportunity is a little bit more difficult. And then further down, you get into true organic search, which is usually a blend of law firms and paid directories. Now, high level takeaway, should you be everywhere in these like red boxes? The short answer is yes. Does that get expensive? Yes. So figuring out where you're going to try to target first is a really important part of the strategy. So like there's no one size fits all approach, but again, like we said, if you're looking for cash flow and leads quickly, LSAs, paid ads. If you're looking for long-term value and growth that has a higher ROI capacity, maps and organic listings are where you should be. So a blended approach makes sense. It doesn't always make sense to have them all happen at the same time when you're starting out though. Okay, so talked about SEO. A few other things that we'll hit here, PR, social media, and we hit on ads. So those are kind of all of the primary areas of digital marketing, like big buckets, and they all have different types of audiences that they hit. So when we talk about some of the things here, like in our last search, for example, we said divorce attorney. We consider that to be a bottom of the funnel or a transactional search. They're saying divorce attorney, like essentially I'm ready to hire a lawyer, or I know I need a lawyer and I'm ready to really start researching and I might contact somebody, versus a search like, how long does it take to handle a divorce? That might be more kind of middle of funnel, or top of funnel might be like, how are business assets divided in a divorce? Like those are things that they start the customer journey. So when we're talking about you want to meet a potential client at a lot of different points, top of funnel is going to be those more kind of informational type searches. And that's where deep content that isn't really meant to convert a client into, or a potential client into a contact right away. It's just kind of informing them and getting them in the pipeline, so to speak. So you can do that through content on your website. You can also do that through some of these other channels that are worth talking about. So social media tends to be a top of funnel channel by and large. You can always run ads. You can try to get direct responses from social media. But if you're doing social media right, what you're really doing is you're developing awareness in a broad audience in a top of funnel way. And you want to be top of mind for people by sharing relevant information, engaging with your community, doing some of the things that Nick and I were talking about ahead of this call, to where when people do think they may need your services, they don't even go to Google anymore. They know who you are because they've seen you. And that's a very top of funnel, and it's like distilling them down through that process. So the reason we just don't see this being very effectively done in the legal space really at all, I think because a lot of lawyers go, what do I do to actually create interesting things that people want to engage with? And we would call this like real community management, thinking about your social media account in the way that you think about your real life networking. Like connect with people that may not have an immediate need for your service, connect with local businesses, connect with other influencers, just build your awareness, and you'd be very surprised how that top of funnel awareness starts to trickle down into real clients. The same is largely true for public relations, but in kind of a different audience set. Public relations kind of supports SEO by building authority, but it also builds awareness. So it's kind of a twofold element of a marketing mix. And PR is kind of this like thing that can layer on top and be really effective for almost everything else that we've talked about, because it gets you in front of your core audience, it supports your SEO, and it also will likely help your social media presence because people are talking about you, and journalists are going to want to talk about that, and social media is a preferred platform there. So there's a lot of peripheral benefit. But again, these are like long-term marketing campaigns that you're not going to get success out of early on, but they will grow. They will help you grow a firm that is scalable and very profitable down the road. If you're down the road, if you're willing to invest and kind of trust that process. All right. So last thing that I have, and Nick, are we still good on time? I have time to go through this. I want to make sure.
Yeah, we're doing good.
Give you enough time. Cool.
Yeah.
We included this here at the end because paid tends to be something that a lot of firms want to do because it's easy to get visibility. And I think dissecting the opportunities for paid advertising online is a good thing for us to talk about, because it can be confusing and there are really clear use cases for why one of these should be preferred over another for your particular firm. So like, we're going to talk about each of these, like the visibility for all these. PPC, usually second below LSAs. LSAs are usually on top, and paid directories are way down in organic results. So when we think about like the pros and cons here, if you're spending money on PPC or LSA, you know that you have high visibility. Now, whether that's going to convert into clients, that's going to depend on your ad copy, your intake system, all those things, but you're going to get high visibility. Because of that, they're a little more expensive than paid directory. And in this case, I'm talking about Justia, FindLaw, Super Lawyers, Avo, the ones where you can pay to have kind of a flat fee listing. The pricing model is different across all these. Pay-per-click model for PPC, meaning people can click on your website all day long. If no one calls you, you still have to pay. LSA's pay-per-lead model, you're only paying when somebody contacts you. Paid directories, it's not a bidding situation. You're just paying a flat fee. PPC, you can literally pay your way to the top. It is an auction. You can say, I'm just going to spend more than everybody else, or I'm going to be strategic about spending more on certain keywords than anybody else. And you can guarantee placement for the most part. LSAs, this is actually a typo. It's not a flat fee. It's like a hybrid bidding model where you can want to pay more, but there's actually some algorithm behind the scenes that is influencing the rankings. So it's kind of like SEO in a way where Google's giving weight to firms with better reviews or better geographic proximity to the searcher. So it's not as monetarily driven as PPC. And then paid directories are truly flat fee, and you're kind of at the mercy of where those directories show up. When we talk about the targeting, which is what we're talking about next, PPC, you can dictate the targeting in a very, very hyper specific way. You could say, I only want to show when people are searching for high net worth divorce in 2 zip codes, and I'm willing to bid on that. LSAs, you can't do that. LSAs, you have broad categories that you show up for. So it's like divorce or custody. So if you want highly targeted campaigns, PPC is the way to go. If you want more broad categorical, you want to cast a wider net, LSAs are a better fit. Paid directories, this depends on the market and like what's available and the actual directory itself. So for example, Justia has far fewer categories than FindLaw does. So FindLaw, you might have the option of 8 different categories in criminal law, and in Justia you have 2. So those are things to think about as you're kind of making that determination. From a price perspective, PPC tends to be the most expensive. It's high cost per click, which leads to high cost per contact and high cost per case. You know, at the end of the day, as a marketing company, our job is to deliver cases at the most effective cost per case we can. PPC is almost always the highest, but people do it because it's quick and it does drive results, but you're going to pay more for them. LSAs are much lower cost per contact, but we can't determine, or we can't impact the visibility in the same way that we can with PPCs. Paid directories, very simple, hard to determine whether it's high or low because it's market driven by like the size of the market and the variable pricing that they have. PPC can be a quick setup, but it also is laborious to manage. Like I don't ever advise that people manage PPC accounts on their own. Google does have what's called a smart campaign, and it's a very stripped down version that's kind of intended for like end users. But in the legal sector, because cost per clicks are so high, it usually just ends up with people burning through money because it requires machine learning and you need to spend a lot of money over time for that to work. So it can be quick setup, but the better option is actually do a more robust setup so that you're only bidding on terms that you really care about and you're spending your money wisely. LSAs, because these are relatively new, there's a fairly extensive background check process, but that's actually getting easier. So these were designed by Google to allow end users to do this. Like you don't need a marketing agency to set up or manage your LSAs. You can do this on your own. We can help with it if you're just like, I want white glove, just do it. But you don't need a company like ours to do this. Whereas PPC, I strongly discourage people from doing it on their own, like I said. In directories, there's no management. It's basically just the pricing models are so different that unless you have experience navigating what you expect to get from it, it can be a hard decision. So I think that's where an agency can be helpful, but you don't need an agency to set up. You can call FindLaw and say, I want to buy your top spots, and they'll gladly sell you more than you need. It's just kind of part of the process. So, but all of these things can be effective, and they're really market to market. So I think what's important to know here as a takeaway is when you're talking with someone, make sure that you really communicate what your market looks like. Is it a small market? Is it highly competitive? And an agency or a trusted consultant can walk you through that in more depth, because they should be able to point you in the right direction of any or all of these, which ones make sense for you. All right, that was me. I felt like a little rapid fire at the end there, but here's my contact info. We'll share this afterwards, and I will hand it over to Nick.
Thank you, Jim. All right. Let me figure out how to do this because I am.
I'll stop sharing.
Did I do it? Oh, I have to hit present, right? Oh, I'm full screen, whatever. Okay. So, Jim, thank you. It was such a good comparison between the ways that attorneys can really go about starting to market their firm. I love that you separated like the LSAs, because like most companies would consider them kind of in the same breath, right? That LSAs are ads and you can get ads really quick by signing up, but they're two very different things. But I digress. I don't want to talk about Jim's expertise. My name is Nick Werker. I'm the marketing director here at Answering Legal. So we are a 24/7 answering service that's exclusively for law firms. We've been around since 2013. I like to say I was here on the third day, not like the opening day, but I started very soon after. I just wanted to take some time and follow up what Jim was talking about really marketing your firm and sort of driving leads and new clients to your firm by saying that once you get those leads, you need to have a plan and a process in place by which you're going to convert them to paying clients, because all of your marketing, your branding, advertising, all of that is well and good. But if you're not actually driving profits through the door, you're not going to be able to afford that nice marketing. So I want to talk about responding to new lead requests, managing your legal intake process, talking about setting up these processes, and also the follow-up and defining next steps, because sales is kind of a dirty word when you talk to lawyers, but a lot of these things are kind of like sales tactics. So some things to know about managing new leads. Your firm is likely to receive lead requests from a wide variety of places. So you might have, like Jim was mentioning before, you might have a referral network. You might have other firms that you do business with, where if somebody comes to them and you do criminal, but they do personal injury, you switch vice versa. If somebody comes through the door, they have a criminal case, you'll get the lead referred to you. Why all of intake and having these processes in place is so important is because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter where you get the lead from, right? You want to make sure that you're providing the best possible experience for these customers so that they end up hiring you. And again, you can make some money. So if somebody is referred to you and yes, they go to your website and they're validated, they see that you've got all of the credentials that they're looking for, they can really trust you, right? When they go to call you, even if they're a referral and they hit your voicemail, they're going to hang up and look for help elsewhere because they have a problem that they need addressed. So it doesn't matter if they're coming from Google, it doesn't matter if they're a referral, it doesn't matter if their best friend used you and they said you were the greatest thing since sliced bread. If they hit that voicemail, they're going to look for help in other places. So answering the phone still remains, but far and away, the number one way that consumers contact attorneys. In fact, it's in the Clio Legal Trends report that I think 70% of the first contact between consumer and law firm is going to be a phone call. And not only, so we have this up here, right? The clients aren't likely to care about your listed office hours. It's not only that, it's that your office hours are the same time that other people are working. So if they're working all day and then at night they're doing this research, like how Jim is talking about, maybe they're top of funnel, maybe they move down the middle of funnel and then they're ready to make a decision. It could be 7 or 8 o'clock at night, your time, when you're out of the office and you don't have the phone forwarded or guaranteed to be picked up somewhere. They'll try to call you. And if they're not getting anybody, they're going to move on. So we're going to talk about voicemail and the cost of voicemail. So most prospective clients won't be interested in leaving a message and patiently waiting for your call back. I remember years ago, there was a study by Vonage that it was 80% of people that reach a voicemail, hang up and just call the next thing on Google. So the cost is basically what you're paying for the lead. And then how Jim mentioned before, how much money you could have actually made off of that case. And a lot of times it's different based on your area of practice. I couldn't get that word out. Sorry. So I always I sort of have these like gimmicky things that I tell people when I talk to different types of lawyers is, for a personal injury attorney, you're sifting for diamonds, right? Every phone call that you're generating at your firm, if you're not answering that, it could have been $1 million case. That could have been your biggest case ever. For other areas of practice, the urgency might be higher. So that person is really not going to wait around for you to call them back. So according to the 2019 Clio Legal Trends report, 42% of customers said that if they like the first lawyer they speak with, they don't need to speak to anybody else. So just that follow-up, it really it illustrates how important it is to actually speak to customers because they don't want to have this impersonal dealing with you. So I want to talk about the actual way that you manage your phone calls, right? So even if you're not going to use an answering service, I want to talk about the best ways to actually answer your phone calls and set up processes by which you can make sure that the phone's always going to be answered. So if you are advertising or marketing and you have your phone number out there, that is great. I want you to have a plan for 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Where is that phone going to ring? Now, the answer can be it's going to go to voicemail. That's where the purpose of this exercise, that's fine. But I want you to know at least where it's going to be, because sometimes I'll ask an attorney, what do you do with your phones on nights and weekends? And they'll say, oh, I don't know. And I'm like, what do you mean you don't know? Does it go to your voicemail? Oh, I guess it goes to voicemail. It might not always be the case. So let's make sure that we know that, say you have an advertising number, all of that stuff gets funneled through to the office phone. Great. After hours, where is your phone going to ring? You can forward all of those calls as soon as you leave your office to your cell phone. And you can have a plan and say, from the hours of when I leave my office, say you leave at 5 to 10 p.m., I'm willing to take calls on my cell phone, but at 10 p.m., I take my sleeping pill, I take melatonin, I conk out. I'm no longer going to be answering phone calls. It goes to voicemail. That's all well and good. So we want to know where the phones are going to be ringing, and we want to know what we're going to do as a follow-up if you miss the call. So if you are a one-man, one-woman show law firm, the plan should be that you're going to call that person back as soon as possible, or you can try and text them, right? But if you have staff in your office, let's say you have one receptionist and a paralegal, let's come up with a plan. So maybe you do Monday, Wednesday, Friday, the paralegal calls those people back. Tuesday, Thursday, your receptionist calls those people back. Make sure that you know who is going to be accountable for getting to which phone calls at which times. Hit the space bar really loud. Okay. So when you actually answer the phone, and right now we're talking about, let's try and shoot for 100% of the time, right? But it's an imperfect world. So I want everybody here to at least make a script for how you're going to answer the phone. And this is important because your perception really ultimately is your reputation. So when clients call you, there's a difference between hello and thank you for calling the law office of Nick Werker. How may I help you? And you can see I've rehearsed that a lot, so it sounds better. So role playing is a big thing. You can rehearse it as many times as you want. You'll get better at it. It'll roll off your tongue. It'll sound more natural. But the more times that you replicate this process, and when you actually set it as a script, there is no room for error. You're not going to answer the phone rudely, hello, and people want to know where they're calling. So that's another thing, is you want to make sure that the person immediately knows that they've called the right place for help. So when people call me at my business, Answering Legal, every single person who answers my phone says, good morning, good afternoon, thank you for calling Answering Legal. How may I help you? Without fail. After that happens, when it comes to potential new clients, you kind of want to find out why they're calling you. So what I do is I let people talk for a little bit, because I've just said, how can I help you, right? They'll say, I'm looking for help with, you're a divorce lawyer. I'm looking for help. I think I need to file for a divorce. You say, okay, great. Well, no, actually, back up. You don't want to say, okay, great, because that's not a good thing. I want to talk about mirroring the caller's tone. So people will ask me, like, how can I get through phone calls easier and like really relate to this person? And I always talk about this. I'm like a broken record, is you want to meet the caller where they are. If they call you and they're kind of laughing and joking, you want to match that with them, because otherwise you just kind of like, it's very off-putting. And I learned this campaigning for who was I campaigning for? The county executive in my town. So you mirror their tone. What that does is that immediately disarms them and gets them right on your level, right? So if they call you and they're joking around, you want to, be lighthearted with them, joke a little back. Maybe you don't say something offensive, but, mirror their tone. If they're really disappointed and upset and they are very serious, well, you don't want to be cracking jokes at their expense. You want to kind of, I'm sorry to hear that, like, let's talk about this and make sure that you get the help that you need. Kind of meet them where they are. Once you've done that, you're going to want to find out why they're calling you. And then the intake. So I'm sure that this is on the next slide. I want to talk about intake. This is the actual questions that you want to ask your callers that you need the answers to in order to A, get enough info from them that you can actually help them, and B, also know the pain points to let them know that you are going to be able to help them and that they should trust you with their business. So we say legal intake process because processes are repeatable, and that's really what we want to do here. Is we don't want to leave anything up to chance. So when somebody calls you, say for a criminal case, you want to get their name, their phone number, maybe an email address. If that's up to you if you do email, but immediately get the person's name and phone number and then ask them the pertinent information regarding their case. So if you do more specific things in criminal law, then obviously you want to ask more specific things. But what we recommend is you ask them, what's the charge? So what are you being charged with? What was the date of the arrest? The county/municipality that you're in, so that you know if you can actually help them, and their next court date. Now, this does a few things. Lets you know what kind of case you're dealing with immediately. So if they got a DUI, you can ask further questions. Did you take the field sobriety tests? What was the BAC if you blew in the breathalyzer? All of those things are going to be more helpful to you in preparing a case, right? But you want to know if they're in your county and you're eligible to practice there. If you're going to make the trip, you want to know how soon it is, so that you can tell them, like, hey, this is coming up. I can be there. I can put this on my calendar, and I can show up and we can take care of this together. And the date of the arrest is the same sort of thing. The reason that you need to ask these things is because when somebody tells you, hey, I got a DUI, you tell them, listen, my firm handles 50 DUIs a month. The results that obviously I can't guarantee you any results, but the results that we get for our clients is often, a favorable outcome. And let's talk about, what happened during your case. Why did you get pulled over? What was this? What was that? And in telling them that you have a strategy and a proven history and a proven track record of success, they're more likely to hire you. So that at the end, when you say, hey, this is going to cost $2,500 as a retainer, is that doable for you? I can send it over now. And you want to define next steps. So I want to talk about defining next steps. Well, okay, I'll follow my predetermined thought process here. So the list of questions that you want to carve out and really curate, I like to do everything online because I can't read my own handwriting because I'm 4 years old, and because I lose pieces of paper all the time. So what I've done is I use hosted web forms, but you can use Google Forms. If you type in Google Forms, you can create the questions and you can just leave blank answers at the bottom of each question. So 6 questions, right? Name, phone number, date of the charges, date of the arrest, county, municipality, next court date, right? That person gives you all that information. You type it into the form, you hit submit, send it to yourself. And if you have different types of clients, so say you practice criminal and personal injury, right? You can have 2 different forms. You can have a personal injury form, name, phone number, and type of accident, injury sustained, who you're suing, who was negligent, and then sort of you can leave an open-ended box for like details of what happened and write down the story. But the point is that you need to have a plan in place for how to proceed. First of all, with the legal intake, and second of all, with how you're going to follow up. So if you've got this information, the next thing you want to do is define next steps. So what I'll often do is I'll say, I'm not asking you to make a decision right now. Think about it. Here's my proven history of success. Let me send you over some more information about me. I'll send you a retainer agreement so that you can see it. You can look over it. It'll have the pricing on there. And then if you want to talk more about this, or if you just want to move forward with me, just send back the retainer. That puts the ball back in their court, but it also gives them something to do. I like to give people actionable things to do so that they know how they're going to proceed with me. How do I proceed with you? I'm sending you a retainer agreement. You sign it. You agree. Then we'll move forward from there. Oh, I'm expecting an email from you. Great. You put the ball back in their court. Oh, we have a 30-minute consultation scheduled in my office for next week. Great. I'll see you then. All of these things are actionable things that each client can do whereby they feel brought along in the process. That's ultimately all people want to know. And the number one complaint, seriously, that I see about lawyers online is that they don't define the process, so nobody knows what to expect from them, and they're not communicative. And if you're answering your phone and defining next steps, I guarantee you that no one can say that about you. So let's talk about who performs the legal intake at your firm. And I want to say that every person who is allowed to touch your phone when it rings should be trained in the art of legal intake. And that's really like a simple thing to do, right? Train them on how to answer the phone. Tell them you want them to mirror the caller's tone. And if you got like somebody who really can't talk and their forte is something else, then don't put them on the phone. Don't set people up for failure. But we won't talk about that. But you as the lawyer, you're often really busy. I hope so, right? I hope you're busy handling other things. I hope you're busy like assembling a case, appearing in court, meeting with consultations, all the stuff that lawyers do that I don't even understand because I obviously didn't go to law school. So that's where like answering legal comes in, right? It's so easy to just set it and forget it, right? We have a process by which you can set like 3 or 4 rings. And if you can't get to the phone call, it'll forward over to us. I don't want to do like a shady sales call. But make sure that you have somebody to answer your call if you can. If you and your staff don't have time, like I said, consider reaching out to answer in legal, but make sure that anybody who's allowed to answer your phone is trained to answer these questions and has access to like the forms that we talked about before. You can even print it out. Some people like paper and you can fill it out on each thing and print out a bunch and keep filling them out. Whatever you need to do, whatever your thought process is, we just want to talk about setting up the process so that nobody can like deviate from it. And with that, I'm going to stop talking and allow other people to. My mom always told me to play nice and let other people talk because I talk way too much. So if there are any questions, Jim and I are available to answer them. Full disclosure, this is all going to be recorded and sent to you anyway. But yeah, I'm Nick Werker from Answering Legal. Thanks for listening to me rant. What do you think, Jim?
I have a question for you, Nick, just to
Let's
throw
do it.
one out there. So something that we do a lot of is working with kind of call flows and call routing. Is that something you could talk about real quickly with kind of your take on that?
Sure. And I like to preface this with, it depends on who your phone provider is. So some of the stuff is not achievable. And if it's not, then we can talk about upgrading, but call flow is, and protocols really is like defining what you want to do with each type of client. So say, and I like to say that like, if a new client calls in, you want to have somebody who's ready to do an intake, but maybe an existing client calls in, you have a protocol by which you're going to transfer that over. The other thing that you can do is with more sophisticated phone solutions, you can have like ring groups or hunt groups is what they're really called. And the phone can ring in multiple places at once and whoever gets to it first can answer it. It really depends on who your staff is and what you want to set up. And there's so many possibilities. I'm tripping myself up here trying to answer this question because there's so many possibilities. But just know that if you have a solution like Ring Central or Vonage or like a voice over IP, you can make it ring in one place for 3 rings and then somewhere else for 3 more and then somewhere else, or at the same time. Just, it's whatever's going to work best for you is my vague answer.
Yeah, and it is vast, like where you have kind of unlimited capabilities. I think something that we have found that's successful with this is, so we use CallRail, which is like a call tracking and routing system, but there are a lot of others out there. But for our folks that use an answering service, they may say, look, my business hours are, 8 to 5, but I'm usually in court in the morning. So like, I want all my calls from 8 to noon to route directly to an answering service, and they'll patch me through if I'm available. But I want it to come to my cell phone from noon to 5. And a lot of it's harder to do with your phone company. It's easier to do with like a call tracking platform where you can kind of set that up, or, and we just see better interaction. You can also kind of have a sense of what the percentage of calls answered are. Like if you actually get really serious about wanting to monitor, like, is my intake department actually doing a good job? Like a system like CallRail or call tracking metrics, there are a few of them out there that you can run reports on. Like if you're at the CEO level of your law firm and you say, what's happening over there? Like you can get sophisticated reports from a system pretty easily on how the calls are being routed. Are they being handled well? What's the drop rate or the abandon rate? How many are hitting voicemail? And you kind of manage around those metrics. So from like a legal operation, like a law firm operation standpoint, tools like that could be really helpful, especially in conjunction with an answering service where you always have a backstop and you can kind of determine when you want them to hit there. We see that as being like really critical, especially as firms are like scaling. And it's like, I have a part-time receptionist, but I don't have a full-time one. So I need to do a couple different things throughout the day.
It's so true. And it's, I always find it funny when, so we used to do a lot of outbound sales and people would be like, I don't need that. I have a receptionist. I answer my own phone. And it's like the uphill battle of trying to tell an attorney, like, no, you don't. But I have a very specific question for you that I almost forgot about, but I'm excited to ask this. So when we're talking about establishing your identity, and I don't know why I'm automatically thinking about this in terms of like the content on your website, but I wanted to ask you to elaborate more on establishing a tone of voice in your brand and on your website, because it seems like obviously you want to have consistency when you do that sort of thing. But how can people really try to drive like their tone of voice through in their messaging to their consumers? And does it matter that much?
That's a good question. And the answer is pretty nuanced, I think. And I think it's definitely achievable and it makes sense to spend time doing it. I think sometimes I see people go in either extreme here where they don't care at all about their tone of voice, or they have such a narrow tone that they're trying to hit that like it's not achievable at any type of scale, to where they can't bring in another person to write because they're never matching that voice. So what I will say about tone of voice is this matters a lot in certain fields of law and less in others. So if you're working with a very sophisticated clientele, you would never want to have a tone of voice that's really hokey or too lowbrow. But we see like more like lowbrow type of language actually work pretty well on criminal defense lawyer sites, for example, or things where the end client may not be that sophisticated. Not saying all criminals are not sophisticated, but there's just a different demographic at play there. So I would say that it matters because, like you had mentioned, Nick, like you want to meet somebody where they are, and your tone needs to be in the range of where you think your audience is. So reading level is even a thing to think about here. Like we use like a reading level score in the back end of our when we write content for people. If we're writing a criminal defense website or something or even an injury site, we want to think about a reading level between level grade 6 and grade 9. There's a Fleisch-Kincaid reading score, I think is what it's called. That's your tone. So, and within that, you can have a different tone of voice. Like, are you going to be, I'll use the New York example. Are you going to be a New Yorker and be like really direct and like everything's brass tacks and you're brash and like, is that your tone? Like you can write that tone and either you need to do the writing or you need to really create content guidelines so that whoever you're outsourcing that to understands it. And that works if your audience shares that same mentality and appreciates that. Or do you want to be someone who's like a little more like Midwestern, like, oh shucks, like we can help you out. Like we worked with a firm in Wisconsin that I really liked like the way that he spoke was so comforting, and we really tried to match that. And it was hard because like you wanted that level of comfort to be perceived as soon as somebody lands on the site of like, not even talking about law. He's just like, what's bothering you? Like he would always be like, can we visit? He would use the word visit. And I really liked that. It wasn't like, can we meet? It's like, can we visit for a little bit? And I'm just like, yeah, let me sit down. We want to hold hands. I don't like, you're just like really warming me up here. But it's those little nuances of word choice that can go a long way. And I think it gets overlooked. So that was a really long-winded answer to your question, but
it's interesting for me because I deal with the same thing. So, and back when we used to be really small, obviously we started out, really local. So we were really good at the New York, get right to the point, ask the legal intake questions. Okay, the attorney's going to call you back. Don't worry about it. Click. As we got bigger and reached different parts of the country, that didn't really work really well. And people would be like, oh, my callers, they really didn't like a couple of your receptionists. They said that they were rude. And we're like, whoa. Like, if somebody's being rude, we want to know what they said. And he's like, no, it wasn't that they said anything in particular. It's that they just, they rushed them off the phone. So it's kind of weird and kind of strange to admit, but we had to implement different tones of voice for people's accounts with us. So some people get like the Southern charm, other people we write like, Midwest, other people. I think in California we have one too, where the whole point is to like, again, meet the person where they are. So when we call it the Southern charm, it's because a lot of like people in Florida especially thought we were really rude. So what we do is, hey, how are you? How's everything going today? Sometimes people will want to talk about the weather and we'll say things like, oh, I'm actually not located in Florida, because you don't want to lie. But outside here, it's a little rainy, so I'm jealous of the weather over there. It sounds great. How can I help you today? And it's important to people, you want to meet the person where they are, and the tone of voices. I could talk about all this nuanced crap.
Yeah, and
forever.
I mean, it's something that I think everyone knows when they think about it, but especially if you're in a law firm, you don't think about this on the daily, is that the first time someone calls a law firm, they're terrified, most likely. They're terrified, or they have no idea what to expect. And it's really like the first 2 seconds of interaction that, like you mentioned, disarms, just like lets them feel at ease and makes them like, it changes the things that they're going to say. Like it'd be hard to like prove exactly how this manifests in different ways, but like yeah, when we did a lot of cold calling in our early stages, it was, which, sorry if we've ever cold called anyone here, we know it's terrible. But part of that is why firms answer the phone gruffly sometimes, is they're getting solicited all the time. It's terrible. But that was such a crazy experience for me because I wasn't in the legal field before. And I was like, what? I'm so turned off by the experience you just had. Like, I don't even want to work with you because I feel like you're going to be aggressive or abrasive or what have you. And granted, salespeople are different, but like, yeah, the point really is like, people are terrified when they call because they don't know what's going to happen next. And there needs to be a tone that matches the way that they're feeling to make them feel at ease. And that is the same is true with a website to a lesser extent, because you have a little bit longer to like figure out, oh, what am I really looking at? What am I really reading? I'll poke around a little bit. There's not that like, oh, I need to respond. I can't, you're on your toes.
Yep.
Heels, I guess.
I'll shut up after this, I promise. But I had this really embarrassingly bad produced video, because obviously when you're starting out, I'm sure as anybody here knows, you don't have the biggest budgets in the world. So I did a voiceover video about, what was it about? I don't even remember anymore, but one of the taglines in it was, would you call 911 and leave a voicemail? And that's what I was trying to get across, is that attorneys need to understand that people are calling you with really emergencies. Like if you're doing criminal defense, people don't really want to get arrested. This is quite possibly the worst thing that's going to happen to them. Same with bankruptcy, same with divorce, same with getting in an accident, personal injury. A lot of these things are really traumatic, and so you want to make sure that you're providing immediate help as well as like compassionate help is how I'll explain it. But yeah, nobody asked any questions, but you guys are all still here. So with that, I'd like to say I'm going to speak for myself. I really appreciate everybody being here, but Jim, I really appreciate you doing this with us. I had a ton of fun, and
yeah, we appreciate the opportunity. This has been great. Thanks for everyone who's joining. Thanks for hosting us, Nick. And looking forward to doing this again in the future.
Yeah. So everybody who's here, again, for the 100th time, you're getting a copy of it. If you have any follow-up questions that you want to ask either me or Jim, our contact info will be on there. And we look forward to seeing you again next time. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks.